WNST.
From beating Bill in Foxborough 4 times in the playoffs. He beat him twice, but he almost beat him 4 times. And nobody plays them, particularly in that building, like the Ravens. So they caught a break. The Chargers also had to cross the country twice with their playoff games, so I think that wore them out a little bit. And so here they are.
I've written a couple of books. I always say it's that moment of crazy that when it's really going to happen, it's like being pregnant or something. It's like, this is going to change me. I'm going to do. Where did that happen for the Belichick thing for you? He's obviously this iconic figure long before this weekend and has been so private, but also there's a lot that's been shared because he's been in the public light. And a lot of the story really begins in Baltimore, right? Like it has a Baltimore-Annapolis seed for all that this has become. Right?
He was so shaped by his time growing up in Annapolis. His father was a major influence in his life, of course, but being at the Naval Academy and watching not just Joe Bellino and Roger Staubach, his idols, the Heisman Trophy winners at the Academy, but just the daily approach of the students, the student athletes, where it wasn't just on the football field. And a number of them told me Steve Belichick, his father, wasn't just training them to be good football players, but also to be combat officers down the road. And so if you're attending the Academy, you know that every detail of every day has to be treated with extreme urgency. And Bill saw that, and I think he's applied that to his coaching philosophy, where every day, whether it's mini camp in May or preseason practice or a game, has to be treated with Game 7 of the World Series urgency.
Not, to disrespect the guy running our Navy right now, but we would say naval precision, right? Do your job. All of that stuff that maybe we don't associate it with being military in such an overt way, the way we would if maybe there was some other coach who would bid.
On cable about war and generals, and he's into that. And Steve was too. His father, of course, he spent decades at the Academy, and I think just the daily approach of the coaches, the players, and the students on that campus really made an impact on him at such a young age, and I think it shows in his coaching. Now, comparing the military and potential combat to football is a dangerous thing to do because you don't want to trivialize what it really means to be in the Navy and to attend the academy. But I know just being around that coaching staff and Wayne Harden and his father and Forzano and those figures, it really did impact him in a great way.
In trying to put the pieces together to write the kind of book you wanted to write, and people were coming up right before you went on and saying, great book, and to invest in doing it, and then the people who invest in reading it want to learn about it, along the way, when I felt like I had an outline, and then you start talking to people, and then you start learning stuff like you could not have possibly known if you weren't trying to write a book, right?
That's right. And he didn't cooperate, and he actually asked other people not to cooperate. So he made it as difficult as possible.
I wanted to point that out because I figured Bill wasn't like, Ian, come on over.
No.
We'll put the flip-flops on. I'll tell you anything you want to know.
It was the complete opposite of that. But in some ways it made me better. I interviewed 350-plus people. And in part, Bill puts obstacles in front of his players to make them better. The obstacles he put in front of me, I think, made me a better reporter. For instance, one thing I didn't know was Bill was going to be the head coach of the Ravens. He was not fired.
Right.
Art Modell was taking him to Baltimore. That was part of the plan. But if you remember, Bill was fired on Valentine's Day, so it was very late, basically, in the season of coach firings, because he was going to be the head coach of the Ravens. But what happened was, behind the scenes, as they were trying to close the deal and the move with banks and getting loans and putting the whole thing together to get to Baltimore, Bill was bugging them about personnel decisions, roster and coaching things he needed in the offseason, and they didn't have time for it, and he wouldn't stop. And Art Modell finally said to another executive, I have to fire this guy. So they fired him. But the reason why he went on Valentine's Day is because the initial plan was to have Bill come home, basically home, to coach the Ravens. I didn't really know the backstory of that.
Things worked out okay for us.
Yeah, right.
I think it worked out okay for him too.
Yeah, well, I mean, and he was a little bit of a weird pariah thing, and the Jets thing was so. You talk about what happened with McDaniels last year, right? I mean,
right.
All of that on the coattails of Parcells, but then didn't want to be on the coattails of Parcells so much, and now. He stands above Parcells, which is a strange thing that, for our lifetime, Parcells, it was always him and everybody else. Walsh, Parcells, he's transcended it all, as has Brady for all of the, is it Montana or Unitas or whatever those conversations are. It's just like, it's over now, right?
That's right.
I don't think there's any conversation anymore.
That's right. They've separated themselves as the greatest coach in court. I think Brady's actually the greatest football player of all time. I would put Jim Brown second. My father would argue that he's no longer with us, but he thought nobody could ever be better than Jim Brown.
There's kind of dominance in the modern era.
Well, that and also
so
Nestor.
incredible.
Jim Brown started making movies at age 30.
Sure.
Tom Brady's still at the peak of his powers at 41. So I would put LT 3, Jerry Rice 4, and Montana 5. But another thing I didn't know before I started the process of reporting and talking to 350 people was just how brutal Parcells was on Belichick in those 3 years with the Jets, and that was a main reason, if not the reason, Belichick went to New England and walked out on the Jets after 24 hours because Parcells was going upstairs and he had to get away from him. And I had Ray Mickens, a former defensive back with the Jets, tell me on the phone that he heard Parcells berate Bill in a way in front of the players at a practice. He said, I can't repeat the words to you over the phone. So there was a lot of that with the Jets, not as much with the Giants when they were together for 12 years, and that really drove Bill to New England.
A lot of people call it abuse, right? I mean, in certain circles, in certain ways, certain players wouldn't take to that. And it wouldn't be Bobby Knight throwing a chair, but it would be along the lines of over the line. For some guys, would not respond well to this at all.
I think you're right, Nestor, and Phil Simms could tell you just how difficult it was to play quarterback for Parcells with the Giants, and they had a love-hate relationship. And Parcells motivated with fear. He motivated with volume. And Belichick was – one thing I always appreciated about his coaching styles, he does not coach with volume. He's not a berater in practice. He's sarcastic. He'll cut you in half with sarcasm in a meeting in front of everybody like he does to Brady. But Parcells could be brutal on Belichick, and that was the way he motivated people. The one thing with the Jets he didn't have on Belichick with the Giants, he weaponized his failure in Cleveland as a head coach against him in those 3 years with the Jets, and that didn't pay off as far as keeping Belichick in the organization.
What interested you as far as the other side of Belichick? I mean, we
said, would you buy one? And it was a good moment, right?
Right.
That was a little window on the bill away from the facility that America never sees.
Do you think you'll ever write a book?
Yes, I think he should, and I think he will, because he's a control freak like most head coaches, and there have been other books out there, mine included, and he'll want to have the final word. He's not going to let Ian O'Connor or anyone else have the final word, printed word on his legacy. So I think he'll do it 2 or 3 years after he retires.
Is he pissed?
At me?
Yeah, or the book? I mean, just in general.
My understanding, before I covered my first game in Foxborough after the book came out, I called Stacey James, the PR chief, and I said, if Bill or anyone else in this organization has I will be up there. You name the day, the time, the place. And he got back to me and said, he talked to Bill's guy, Bears Nigerian. He talked to other people in the organization. He says, not necessary. Nobody has any major issues with your book. Now, there might be minor issues. I'm sure Bill doesn't love some things that are in there. But as far as I was told, he does not have major issues with the book.
This Brady thing's unbelievable, right? This is its own story in a football way, right?
Well, now we're talking about Brady, and I asked him this question on a phone call I had with him in 2017. Michael Jordan and Brady. Michael Jordan is the ultimate standard of greatness in American team sport. If Brady ties him now, and he's certainly playing at a higher level than Jordan did at age 40, but he needed his legs more in his sport than Brady does in his, so maybe it's not a comparison. But when do we start saying, is Tom Brady, if he wins 7, is he the greatest athlete in the history of American team sports, just in terms of performance? And I think he'll be right in that conversation.
Hope everybody goes out and gets the book. Ian O'Connor here, of course, doing all sorts of things. You have any more projects? You've got another thing? You're doing a LeBron thing next or something?
My wife would either divorce me, kill me, throw me out of the house. This was 3 years of blood, sweat, and tears.
See, every time the Ravens win a championship, I write a book. My wife thinks it's awesome. You know, I just go away for like 100 days.
We should trade wives, I guess.
Are you a Jack Nicholson shining kind of like in a dark room in a corner kind of?
Not that grim. It's not. That grim, but
it is a solitary thing.
It took over my life for 3 years, and you're an author. You know that feeling when you wake up, it's hovering over you every second.
You have
to
immerse. You can't. Yeah. If you divorce from it for a couple of days, you come back, and your knife isn't. At least not for me. I forget where I am. You know, when I get rolling, I got to go. Right?
You have to let it go. You have to go with it.
I got to get to the end of it.
Right.
I got to get to the end.
I would have days where I'd say, okay, today my goal is to write 1,500 words. But if I'm at 1,500 and I'm feeling good, I know there are going to be other days when I'm not going to be able to do that. So I'll go to 3,000, 3,500 because I need to make up for those other days where it's not there.
It's got some pictures, but it's really thick books, all right? I mean, like, you went full in.
Now, people have told me, this is self-serving, of course, that it looks big, but as a read, once you start reading it, it doesn't feel too long. So I hope people give it a shot and find the same thing.
You know, I good meals, good movies, good books, however long they take, it's all good. I appreciate you dropping by.
Thanks,
and
Thank you for the invitation.
you know, and it's great to have experts doing expert work because there aren't a whole lot of people still doing books the way maybe.
It's the hardest thing I've ever done, and I think most authors, you might feel the same way, would say the same thing.
Yeah, and not as rewarding as maybe you want it to be.
Yeah, that's right.
Financially or otherwise. Ian O'Connor joining us here. Go check out the book. We're on Radio Row. It's all brought to you by our friends at LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute, as well as our friends at Strategic Factory, where they create your masterpiece along with you and your brand and your company for hats and shirts like this. Back for more on Facebook Live and our WNST TV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Sports.